It is I, the very dashing Professor Alaric Nordia, and today we're talking about diversity efforts and whether or not they really work. And the answer is no, they don't. Now, to know whether or not something has a positive effect on university students, it is only necessary to see the results that it produces over a period of time. Diversity, inclusion, and equity have shown that they have failed this test dramatically. Rather than provide a better environment for students, this initiative is undermining other areas of education that could greatly benefit students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. Evidence from a 2018 study, which I will link below, shows that in the North American case, the percentage of enrolled students per ethnic groups have been fairly consistent from the 1990s to 2015. The researchers suggest more diversity instead of changing the approach, because for 25 years, the same approach has not worked, but somehow it's going to work now. Is that really a wise choice considering the record that shows that diversity efforts are mostly ineffective? The question to ask then are, why doesn't diversity as a policy work? And why is spending money on mentoring and student support a much better system? Well, there are several reasons that diversity efforts do not work. And one of those are pointed out by Eric Smith. And he points out that support for diversity theories, such as critical race theory, often actually have the opposite effect than that, which is because those initiatives take a very shallow approach and do not address the underlying problems. Instead, they appeal to an emotional aspect of attempting to do good or being seen to do good. This leads to free inquiry being stifled when any criticism of those ideas takes place. So how does that impact on diversity efforts? Well, diversity of thought, experience, opinions, and ideas are important, and intellectual diversity is a predicate of high innovation both in students and in faculty. As Professor Gad Saad mentions in his observations of DEI, which he actually likes to call DIE, the movement is often implemented in universities with a kind of religious fervor, and that not only students, but also faculty are expected to agree to the most minute details, leading to a loss of meritocracy. This notion is supported by findings that lowering the standards of certain groups also causes a bigotry of low expectations, causing a passive atmosphere of ethnic or racial superiority and inferiority, where people are held to a higher or lower standard based on their ethnicity or background. So instead of removing racism or ethnocentrism, it actually creates it. It's a case of the cure being as bad as the disease. So to make matters worse, Dr. Thomas Sowell noticed that allowing students to enter by lowering the bar rather than allowing them to get to a position where they can actually pass the bar results in a high dropout rates amongst Black students at MIT. It was something like 25%. Eventually, this poor school matching for the sake of affirmative action becomes a slap in the face to hardworking Black students who were told that they were being given an opportunity, but actually they were being thrown in the deep end when it came to scholastic competitiveness, leading to what Sowell termed artificial failures. Now, in the case of Harvard, socioeconomic status speaks volumes. Sorry, I have an itchy nose. With about 70% of students coming from the richest 20% in the country and 15.4% from the richest 1% elite. Now, the issue here is not then systematic racism, as so often alluded to, but an issue of socioeconomics. How can a young Black student from Harlem who enters Harvard hope to compete with a Black student from the top 20% or 1%? It's unlikely that that student from Harlem has enjoyed the same access to elementary and secondary education as those with privileged backgrounds, even in the same ethnic group. So it's not an ethnic issue, it's a socio-economic issue. Therefore, instead of lowering the bar, it seems that the large amount of money and resources that could be used either to prepare students and bring them up to the standard or create scholarships for highly intelligent but economically underprivileged students being wasted on ineffective and needless positions, specifically in diversity. Now, the following salary estimates are for diversity officers that I found on Glassdoor. Chief Diversity Officer, City University of New York, between $108,000 to $125,000 per year. Chief Diversity Officer, University of South Carolina, $132,000 to $142,000 per year. Chief Diversity Officer at SUNY, $170,000 to $186,000 per year. Chief Diversity Officer, California State San Marcos, $164,000 to $176,000 per year. And Arundel Community College, $116,000 to $125,000 per year. And American River College, $132,000 to $142,000 per year. These are very large amounts of money. Surely such funds would be better directed at assisting students who need it the most, rather than hiring someone to do the job that, frankly, a counselor could probably do better. Not probably, will do better. Definitely. So such funds would provide much needed fees for scholarships, mentors, and tutors. I'm forgetting how to speak English. Anyway, or alternatively, instead of hiring individuals who have a title based on diversity but little actual impact, would it not be better to do away with such positions and lower college and university fees across the board, but especially for students from disadvantaged backgrounds? Sounds like that would help a lot of people. In reality, a better methodology would be to allow students to enter lower level universities or colleges and use funding that is paid to diversity officers and divert these funds to tutors who, for 1 or 2 years, focus on assisting students from the lower socioeconomic backgrounds to attain the level of essential skills needed to succeed at elite universities, not just throwing them in the deep end. Students can then be allowed to transfer into those elite universities via the scholarship program and have a far better chance of graduating. So you're not making, as Sowell says, these artificial failures. You're giving them the skills they need. If indeed you want to actually help people, let's assume you actually want to help. Alternatively, such tutors and mentor programs could take place inside the elite universities themselves. Instead of merely ticking a box students will have received the skills that they need to succeed and can do so using their own effort and using their own hard work. This not only creates meritocracy, but it also eradicates tokenism and the bigotry of low expectations, because then no one can argue that any group has been given a free ride. They've been given the tools to succeed on their own. Does mentoring really work? Well, I interviewed the professor and author Isaiah Rashad II, no less, and he spoke of the powerful effect of mentorship and how it assists struggling students from low-income backgrounds. Now, Professor Rashad, he's no stranger to difficulty himself, because his story has a lot of parallels actually to Dr. Sowell. He had a difficult childhood. He tried to make a library card at the age of 10, even though he was in a gang at that time and he couldn't read. And he was helped by a librarian, and that opened his eyes to a new world. He admitted the fact that he couldn't read was one of the factors that led him to be educated by the gang, further underscoring the need for a good basic education. Now, at the age of 12, he decided to leave the gang, a potentially deadly action, and one for which most people are actually killed. Now, fortunately, he survived this process of jumping out the gang, which means to leave the gang. But he was beaten so severely that he had to go to the hospital for several days. Now, over the years, he was mentored and guided by people who saw his potential, and this allowed him to grow. Now he's an avid supporter of mentoring students. And he made a really poignant statement, and I'll read this. Mentorship for students is of more value than a PhD. That's his words. So in his university, he has seen how such one-on-one mentoring and support drastically increases students' chances of success. They're more motivated, they do better. It would then seem that the simplistic on-paper policy of diversity is just that, something that looks good on paper. Observations of Professor Rashad are supported by extensive research conducted by Professor Nuria Ruiz Morillas and Professor Manuel Fandos Garrido, who discovered that tutoring was highly appreciated by students and that positive academic relationships with tutors actually resulted from this. The same study found that only a small number of students reached out for tutoring themselves, but that more would do so if it were actively promoted by the university. Surely, if diversity can be promoted with such gusto, is it not equally important, or I would say far more important, that tutoring and mentoring be promoted by universities? A higher education must move from squandering money on diversity policies that look good on paper and instead start putting the money into tutoring and mentoring programs that can actually help students. Change and assistance for students from disadvantaged backgrounds, whether they be Black, white, Hispanic, any other color, or any other group, it doesn't really matter, then really depends on the support given by both universities and educators together. Defunding of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and funding of mentors and tutors is the first step in doing that.